started here. Okay, here we go. All right, so my hope is that in offering up these steps, you'll have a step-by-step process for working through your planning in a more organized and thoughtful way, and that it will reduce some overwhelm for you as you work through and plan your yoga teacher training. I've been running yoga teacher trainings for several years. Excuse me, my first one back in 2010. And every time I run a session, there is a planning process to go through. And because I've set up these steps for myself, the process gets less and less sort of overwhelming. There's still lots to do. In fact, I think now there's more to do. That sounds a little crazy, but I think the marketing and the planning for it has become a little bit more involved, so to speak. But as I plan my steps, it becomes much easier, and I get a clearer sense of what I'm going to say and how I want to approach it. So that is my hope in offering these steps for you. As I mentioned, today is steps 7 and 8, and these are our final 2 steps. If you have not downloaded the Yoga Trainers roadmap, go ahead and do that. If you're in the Facebook group, you will see this in the first announcement post. There's a link to that, and you can download this training roadmap and get all the steps right here. I do also offer this on Amazon as a larger planner, and in that is a full year calendar as well as these steps and worksheets to help you kind of keep track of everything all in one place. So check that out under Yoga Trainers Workshop on Amazon, excuse me. And all right, so we're gonna get started today. So as we round out these steps, the last 2 steps here, steps 7 and 8, are really about prepping your trainees who are going to be very soon newly minted teachers, preparing them and helping them get started with their first gigs as yoga teachers, as well as really starting to plan for next time for yourself. So pulling those things together and asking some key questions, making some key notes as you plan for next time. The first thing I want to talk about is step 7. So I'm following right along here in the Yoga Trainers roadmap. So again, download that if you still need a copy of that. It's very likely that as you run your yoga teacher training, as you start your yoga teacher training, one of your reasons for running your yoga teacher training may have been that you needed to find more qualified teachers, right? More of them, and teachers that kind of fit what you were offering at your yoga studio. But over time, it's very likely that you will not be able to hire all of the teachers that you are training. You will hire probably a fraction of the teachers that you're training over time. And so one of the things you want to do to help your trainees is, okay, if you can't hire them, at least give them some resources to find their first teaching gigs outside of your yoga studio, because that's really very highly likely. And so I always work through, towards the end of training, this is actually a step I work through with my trainees. If you are a Yoga Alliance registered school, there is some space in the syllabus where you can offer the business of yoga guidance. And that's really where this would fit in. But I also see it as development for your trainees. I mean, part of being a yoga teacher is knowing how to find teaching gigs and what to expect as a yoga teacher. Flipping that switch, just like moving from being a teacher yourself to being a trainer, moving from being a student to a teacher also is, something that there are things that people probably need to discuss and talk through and be aware of and all those kinds of things. Every time I go through this section or this sort of topic with my trainees, there are lots and lots of questions, because over the course of training, most people have started thinking about more in depth about what they want to do with their teaching. And there are a number of questions that always come up for them. So I like to walk through supporting them, and give you some guidance on some things that I've done that have worked and that have generated a lot of questions and inquiries from my trainees as they get ready to teach themselves. So one of the first things I do is I really walk through with them what studios and gyms and some of the locations they might be teaching are expecting of them as yoga teachers. So it's not necessarily just walking in and being, very relaxed and those kinds of things. Those are the feelings you want your students to walk away with when they leave their yoga class. But as a teacher, there is some preparation going on. So I talk with them about that. And, it's really ultimately the same sorts of qualities. Studios are looking for the same sorts of qualities in their teachers as any employer would, right? So you're looking for teachers to show up on time at the time of their class, to be prepared, to be, responsible teachers. They're representing your business. And so, I walk through with them that idea that they are representing someone else's business. And that's really what yoga studios want in their yoga teachers. They want certainly someone who is knowledgeable and can put together a class. Absolutely. But there are also those things: showing up on time, being sure that if you are going to open in the morning or lock up at night, that you're capable of doing those things and you've got your kind of act together with those things. That really they're looking for someone who is an employee. Even if they're a 1099, you still have to show up on time and do your job well and continue to draw students to that class. And, being prepared as a teacher is one of the ways they do that. So I walk through with them those types of, maybe those aren't the most fun things to talk about, but I will certainly say that you see the wheels turning sometimes for some of your trainees, that teaching yoga is a job, and their studios are looking for them to be responsible about it. I help them put together a resume or a CV. Now, the first thing that trainees say is that, well, I don't have any teaching experience. How can I create a resume if I don't have any teaching experience? And I tell them that it's likely you've held a job before, that you maybe have some volunteer experience, or maybe there are things that you've studied in the past that are relevant in addition to your yoga teacher training. And all of those things can go on your yoga CV, right? So a studio owner would want to know that you had been perhaps employed, even, in the corporate world. Any sort of job where you've been employed for a length of time, right, looks good to a yoga studio owner. That shows them that they're responsible. Volunteering, right, is always something that's looked upon favorably. And so we talk through these things with the trainees to help them kind of dig up the things that they've done that, now I see why my teaching experience as a preschool teacher is relevant when I want to apply for a kids yoga teacher job, right? Those two things are very closely related. So even if you taught math to first graders, that's relevant experience. And so helping my trainees put those things kind of together and create a resume or a CV. I tell them not to worry if the resume is one page. In fact, it's probably, great not to have a 3-page resume that you're going to tote around for teaching yoga. That's a lot of information, but really to hone that down and make it concise. So we do spend some time putting that together. I also, as we're in the process of this, putting together their resume or CV, really getting more clear about the who, where, and how they want to be teaching. I think I've mentioned before, I have folks who come through who are nurses or therapists or, occupational therapists, chiropractor. I've had chiropractor come in and take my training before. So think about where you're going to use your yoga skills, and that will help you get real clear about how you're going to use it. Who's your audience? So we talked through some of the ways in which they where they might be teaching. We even talk through things as you go through your training. You hear more and more ways in which your trainees are using their teaching skills, where they're using their skills, and you can bring all of that information that you have to your trainees as they're putting these together. You say, well, have you thought about this? You know, I had a trainee a couple years ago who's doing this. And so all of that's very helpful in this kind of brainstorming session for your trainees. If you are a studio in need of teachers or subs on a regular basis, some of the teachers in your training will fit very nicely what they want to do in their style of teaching, and it makes sense to add them to the sub list. You know where they got their training, right? They know you. And so, you know, working with some of those, it won't be everybody in your training. And so sometimes it's a little more of a discrete conversation, because not everybody in your training will be interested in subbing at your studio if they're, you know, going to use this in some other way. But you want to just make sure you're not hurting any feelings either. So, you know, working with those who it seems like would fit with your teaching at your studio, certainly offering up some subbing opportunities for them. And the last thing that we talk about too is ways that I can help them perhaps get a foot in the door. If they're looking to teach in a certain space, if there's any way I can help them by either providing a recommendation or placing a phone call, if it's anyone I have contacts with over the course of training, maybe it's a place that that's recruited other teachers, I will help them do that and offer that up to them as well. You know, anything I can do to help them find what they're looking for, I feel like is really part of my job. It's not my responsibility, obviously, to make sure everybody gets placed, but if I can help them out with a recommendation or a phone call, that kind of thing, I'll certainly do that as well. So step 7 is helping your trainees get their first teaching gig, or giving them ideas, helping them brainstorm, helping them put together that CV or resume so that they can find that first teaching gig. That's number 7. And number 8, as you're wrapping up, right, it's important also to be looking ahead. So if you have not been making notes about what's been working, what didn't work, do it now. As you're wrapping up training, as you're getting towards the end of training, do it now so that it's all fresh in your head, so that you can use that information, those learnings you have gained over the course of your training for your next session. So things like topics, perhaps, that you want to include next time. Maybe as you started going through training, there were some topics that were of interest to your trainees that perhaps surprised you. And so you want to include some of those topics for next time. Activities or topics that didn't work. Maybe there were things that you were sure were going to be of great interest that weren't. Or activities that just didn't seem to flow well or didn't seem to add to the training and what they were there to do, which is learn to teach yoga classes. So, you know, things that didn't flow so well, and either taking them out or reworking them in some way and trying them again. Updates you may want to make to the books you referenced or your manual and workbook. When folks work with me and I, for the manual and workbook, I send that in an editable form, so that if there's something in there that you changed or left the same that didn't work or that you want more of, you're free to do that and add to that. So it's really a work in process every single time, and over the course of time there are new things that you're going to learn, new things that become kind of the focus in yoga. Like, I think of 2 topics that are really hot topics right now that when I started training were not topics at all. One is in the anatomy section, and that is fascia. That was not something that was part of my original yoga teacher training, because that really wasn't a topic that people talked about. I'm not someone who studied anatomy in college, or, that's not my background. So it was really kind of a foreign thing to me until I started learning about it through yoga. Now it's a piece that I include in my manual. So, and the second is trauma. And that's something that's really developed over the course of time. As I mentioned, I started my first yoga teacher training in 2010. And at that time, people were not talking about PTSD and trauma-informed yoga classes. And now that's very much at the forefront of what yoga teachers should be able to address. And so I have started to learn more about what's relevant there and to incorporate that in my training. So, there are things that you're going to want to adjust over time. Always. So look at those things and consider what those are as you go through your training and taking notes. Things like timing. Did the weekend or weekday schedule that you had work for your studio, for you, for your trainees? Consider whether or not you need to adjust your schedule. Maybe it's, instead of starting in January, you're going to start in March, or vice versa, right? So consider that. Did the daily agenda work? So if you were meeting for 6 hours on Saturday and 6 hours on Sunday, did the way you had your agenda work for you? These are all things that you can change as you go along. Your marketing. Is there something that really worked well? Is there something that didn't work so well? What can you use from last time, right? Try not to reinvent the wheel every time, but use what you've done last time as well to feed into the marketing for next time. It may be such that you've already started your marketing for next time. If you are giving yourself 6 months or so to market, as we talked about in step 5, the marketing sort of starts it's much more educational as you start, and much more talking about specific session details as you go on. So, what are some things in there that you can pull from last time, and maybe you've already started that process. And then, what did you learn from your trainee feedback? Part of improving, growing, is getting that feedback from your trainees. And sometimes it's all great, and sometimes it's not all great. And that's okay. I will say I recommend either giving your trainees a anonymous way to fill out a survey, or some sort of Google form. Those are very easy to do, that can remain anonymous. Because if you just ask them, they're all going to say, yeah, it was great. You're not going to get very thorough feedback from most of your trainees. So, I encourage you to offer them some sort of anonymous way to provide feedback. In fact, I have a feedback form I can post in the group, and you can use that, edit it, use it as your feedback form for your trainings as well. So I definitely recommend that. That's very helpful in preparing for next time and knowing what trainees found valuable. There may be things, of course, that you find valuable that they don't. And so you've got to find some way to marry the two of those things. So feedback is always important. That wraps up our 8 steps. We have gone through everything from finding your training's voice, which also may change every time you run training or every few times you run training, clear through to planning your schedules and having resources and marketing, preparing as a trainer, and then wrapping up and prepping for next time. So I hope that you have found these steps helpful. If there's any questions, please reach out, post in the post here and ask questions. Reach out to me. You can always do that and ask questions. I love to help out and help you get your training going. All right, this is Julie Chavanaugh with Yoga Trainers Tribe, and I will see you next month for more educational videos. Take care.